Right, anyway, I'll introduce myself. My name is Frances. My talk today is about creating successful products. So I hope this is valuable for some of you, or all of you. And it's about asking the right questions. So I run Nightingale Design Research. We're based in Bramcote. We were based in Beeson. We've recently moved to Bramcote, the hub, the metropolitan hub that Bramcote is. And it was founded by myself and my husband, Michael, in 2016. And what we do is we give startups, scale-ups, large organizations, government departments, data and insight they need to create successful products and services. And these are some of the organizations that we work with. So this is startup, this is kind of a scale-up. And we also run a quarterly meetup called Design and Innovation Nottingham. I did edit that, so that must be an old version of it. The next one is Thursday, the 18th of September. Not the 22nd of May, which has already happened. Anyway, if you want to know more about Ding, do ask me about it. It's in University of Nottingham Innovation Park, so on Jubilee campus, and it's in the evenings. And the next one would be quite an interesting one, actually, because a company that we've worked with before who do workshops are running a little mini workshop across the whole session on transport planning. So it's a bit of an unusual, different one. So if you want to experience what it's like to be a transport planner, come along. So to talk a little bit about design research and what we do, I suppose the idea around design research is to do research to inform the design of products. And it's an overlooked part of the design or of the product development process in our experience. People tend to go, oh, I have a great idea, I'll build it. And they don't necessarily go out and do any research and understand who might use it, who might want it. Is there a market for it? And so that's basically what we do. As long as the company understands the need for it, we go and talk to people, either users, potential buyers, customers, people who know things about the market, to figure out, is this a good idea or not? And sometimes not is the answer. And that saves people a lot of time and effort and wasted money. And sometimes yes is the answer, but potentially people need to take a different direction or add a new thing or change who they're targeting or whatever it might be. But the research is all centered around trying to make the product a success in the long run. And the case study I always pull out is Lego, because everyone knows who Lego is. And we also years ago did research with them. I keep talking about it now because everyone knows who they are, and it also seems a bit cool. But just to give a potted history of Lego, they were founded in 1932. They made wooden toys to begin with, and then they came up with the brick in 1958, this very simple invention. It took them a very long time to get the clutch power thing where you can click them together but they don't get stuck. That took them a very long time to perfect. They patented it in 1958, and then they lost the patent in 1988, and they thought, oh dear, all we have is a wooden brick. We're a goner. Everyone else is going to make the same thing as us. We're dead. So, and they also looked at the landscape of children's toys, and they thought, well, all children want is beeping loud toys that are technological and have computers attached and whatever. And so they panicked, I think is fair to say. And from 94 to 98, they tripled the number of toys in their portfolio. So they went from a very small bunch of toys to loads of different toys, like a Galador and a jewelry collection for girls, and all of these different toys that were mostly a failure. Star Wars was a success, continues to be a big money maker, but everything else just fell flat because they were making toys for children they didn't really understand. They didn't go out to children, they didn't do any research with children. They just thought, you want something technological, you want girls, you must want jewelry, of course. And so a lot of these lines failed. They posted their first ever loss in 1998, considering they'd been going since 1932, that's quite an achievement. And then by 2003, they were almost bankrupt, so almost ready to throw in the towel. And at that point, they got a new CEO, and they realized they just didn't understand kids. They just didn't understand what children wanted. They completely lost touch with who their customer was. And so they really went big on research. So their research function these days is absolutely massive. They go into people's homes and they sit with kids and they watch them playing, and they have labs where they do testing of toys, and that was part of what I did, where we went in and tested things in their offices in London, which was cool. And they employed this thing called constant customer engagement. So they basically talk to their customers constantly about what they want, what they need, what might they like, and all of that. And they co-created some products with children as well. So they did a co-design sort of process. And it was obviously very successful because within 2 years, their sales rose 15%, which is very good. And their operating profit in 2022, which I need to update because that's quite an old number now, but it was 2.4 billion euros. So not small, basically. And obviously now one of the most powerful brands in the world. And some of that came from being more savvy commercially, creating sets that have, you know, the pieces that only fit that set. That annoys me as a parent. But they did understand more about what children actually want and need. And I suppose a big discovery as part of their research was they assumed Lego was a solitary toy, so that you sat and you played with it on your own, you built a thing. And through their research, they realized that actually kids play with Lego together in big groups or you know, among siblings. They fight over Lego, they compare what they build, they have little competitions. It's a very sociable toy. And so they had completely just misunderstood how kids play with it, but they also misunderstood the attraction of Lego. They thought, oh, now that kids have computer games, they won't be interested anymore. That's obviously not the case. If you have a child, you have Lego in your house, I guarantee it. And it causes endless fights and endless annoyance. You can see how much I like it, but anyway. And I'm not very good at it either, so I got a lot of criticism from my children as well, which is very cruel. Anyway, so creating successful products. This is my super complex graph, but on a simple level, this is how you create a successful product. Obviously, you start with the idea, do design and development, launch and live, marketing, sales growth, and they obviously feed back into each other. But the foundation of the whole thing is the idea. And if the idea is bad, none of the rest of it is going to work. So if you try to design and develop or launch and live or market a bad idea that people don't want, no matter how much time and effort and money you put into it, it's just not going to work. So that's the conversation I have sometimes with companies is, yes, you could do great marketing, you could put loads of effort into partnerships, you could add this feature, but the fundamental idea is not good, and therefore it's going to be very difficult to get anyone to connect with it or to understand it or to want it in the first place. And so this is where everything starts, but this tends to be the part, in my experience, that's most neglected. So it tends to be the case that someone comes up with an idea, they think it's a great idea, and then accelerators or any sorts of input that people tend to get is, right, now how do you market it and how do you build a team around it? The bit around going, actually, is the idea worth pursuing, tends to get neglected, unfortunately. So what I see sometimes is an idea that's been developed for a couple of years where actually it really needs to go back to the drawing board. There's some fundamental flaw with it. And if they could start again, or if they could just scrap it, or they could pivot it, then potentially there is potential for success there. It's just the idea needs tweaking, changing, pivoting. And so I suppose this is my happy place. This is the place I like to work, is on the idea. Obviously, we could come in at any point, and we have worked with Lego, and obviously they're not at the idea point, although they are at the idea point for new products and services. And so we can have input at any stage, but this is the place where we can have the most impact. And the idea, as I said, is the foundation for the product. And a solid idea should be built on evidence, not on, we think this is going to be a great idea, or I guess that people might like this. And I suppose there's more to it than this, but on a simple level, the kind of parts that need to be there for that strong foundation is a genuine need, for one, a customer demand, something that people actually want. Space in the market or ability to break into the market. So the discussion I've had with some people sometimes is Uber exists. So if you're going up against Uber, then you need to understand what that takes, which is matching their marketing or matching their ability to break into that market. So you don't necessarily have to have a fantastic new idea, but you do have to have the ability to get into that market, and you have to be aware of what that market involves. If it's a highly saturated market, then you're going to have to make space for yourself, and bigger companies do that through brute force. Technical capability and feasibility, can you actually deliver the thing? And is it more complicated than you think it is? It's going to be more difficult to deliver than you think it is. Is it going to be more costly than anyone's ever going to pay for? And then a feasible business model. And this is a tough one that is difficult to decide on early on, but at some point you need to figure out, well, how am I going to make money from this? And surprisingly, that's not something people often think through. You know, who's going to pay for it? How are they going to pay for it? Is the money that I'm going to get in going to cover the technical aspect of it? Is it too expensive to deliver compared to what people might pay for it? And unfortunately, a lot of big companies did start without a feasible business model, Facebook being a very good example. They had no business model. They ended up as an advertiser and publisher, didn't want to be an advertiser and publisher, tried to pretend they're not an advertiser and publisher, got themselves into all sorts of trouble, still around just because they happen to be the first, but their business model is absolutely ridiculous. So, around asking the right questions, breaking down those different parts of the foundation into sections. A genuine need, the questions to ask around that are, what problem is this product solving, or what need is it meeting? So, are you solving a problem for people? Is there something that they require that you're providing for them? Or is there some need or want that you're fulfilling? Can you identify what that is clearly? And it's relatively common for people not to be able to do that early on, for them not to be able to say directly what it is, the need that they're meeting. And it can take time to figure out really what it is that you're providing for people. What's the actual value? Because if you have to go into a convoluted explanation, generally you're sort of missing the mark, or you're not quite defining it clearly enough. It should be fairly clear as to what that need is and what that problem is. Who has this problem or need? So who's your customer? How many of those people exist? If 3 people, then they better have a lot of money because they're going to be keeping your whole business afloat. If it's millions of people, great, but can you provide that for millions of people? If you need to, you have to scale it up for something, you know, if it's a very low cost thing, then you need to deliver to a lot of people. Can you do that? And can they or will they pay for this problem to be solved? So do they care enough about this problem? And that's actually one of the issues that a lot of companies come up against. Yes, this problem does exist, but no one is willing to actually pay for it to be solved. They don't care about it enough for them to pay any money, or they want you to solve it for them for free, which would be nice, wouldn't it? But actually, someone has to pay for it. Space in the market. So one thing I always ask companies to do when we first start out is just figure out what else is out there. And again, it's not always something companies do. They don't always sit down and Google who else is out there, or ask ChatGPT as the more modern approach is. But who else is out there? Does someone else have a similar product? What does that product do? How would it compare to your product? Quite simple questions, but it's worth knowing who's out there. Is the market you're in a saturated market? Is it a very busy market? Is it lots of other products? Are you up against them? How is your product going to be different? Can I break into this market realistically? And what would that take? And what barriers are there to uptake? So is it difficult to get contact with the customer? Is it difficult for them to actually understand what you're doing? What are the potential barriers to them engaging with what you're doing? Technical capability. And this comes up, I suppose, again, in the world of AI, where people say, AI will do this. And it's like, well, AI doesn't do that. That's not something that AI does. So if you're trying to make it do that, then you should have the money to make it do that. It's a technical capability, doesn't exist. So how difficult will this product be to develop or deliver? How hard is it to make this thing happen? What technical skills are needed? Who do you need to actually deliver it? And how expensive is that is often the big question. how does the complexity of the product match up to its value? So if it's a very complex product delivering a very low value outcome, then how are you going to match the complexity to the value? Because if people are only willing to pay £1 for the thing you're delivering, then you better have millions of people paying for that. Whereas if it's a high complexity thing and a high value, yes, it is very complex, but we'll pay hundreds or thousands for it, then that may have a good match. Then it may be, oh yes, we can deliver it and people will pay for it. And are there barriers to development? Is there some issue around the technical aspect that makes it very difficult to deliver? You have to integrate it with another system, for example. So we work a lot in healthcare, and a big issue is if your product doesn't integrate with one of the big providers like EMIS, for example, they do the patient records, then you might as well forget it, because it has to integrate with the patient records process. And the large patient records providers are not invested at all in letting you integrate with their stuff, because they're like, we'll develop that ourselves, thanks very much. You have an idea? Yoink. And a feasible business model. So how will this product or service make money? Seems a fairly simple question, but quite a difficult one to answer. Will customers pay enough to cover the development or delivery costs? And are there regulations, risks, safety issues, or other barriers to consider? Again, this comes up a lot in healthcare. So people will start to talk about, oh, this product will help you to understand whether you have MS, or this product will help you to manage your medication. Well, as soon as you start going into a diagnostic area or something to do with your medication, something that could kill you, then it's a medical device and you are subject to medical regulations, and therefore you're making life very hard for yourself. And so it's worth deciding whether your product is going to be a diagnostic device or whether it's going to be something in the health and well-being space, which takes it a step out of that, and you sidestep those regulations and you don't have to meet all of these different criteria. Of course, the more regulated an industry you're in, the more potential there is to make money usually, because if you provide a very high safety, highly regulated product and other people aren't willing to provide that, then you are in a less crowded market. So there's pluses and minuses to different aspects of that. So the role of research. I mean, basically research allows you to develop a product or service with knowledge rather than guessing. So when we first sit down with a company, we'll say to them things like, who do you think your user is? And they'll come up with something, and my answer then will be, well, what evidence is there to say this person will be interested in this product and that they actually need it? And if they say none, well, it's like, then you're working in the dark. You don't actually know if that person wants that product. You don't actually know if they're going to use it. You don't know what barriers there might be to them using it, or any issues that there might be. And something that comes up a lot again in healthcare is reinventing the wheel or trying something again that's been tried before. So people will come and say, I've got this great idea, and I'll say, Google it, and there'll be a 500-page document about how this thing was tried in 2016 and failed, and these are the reasons why it failed. So at least figure out first what you're up against and know where you're starting from, rather than guessing and assuming. And research can be anything from desk research, which is sitting down and Googling a thing, or reading a book, or talking to someone kind of just casually about something. But at least read what's out there. I would say to people, read the reports, the articles, the blog posts, anything that's out there that might be relevant to what you're doing. But of course, the con of it is that it's restricted to what's available. And if you're looking in a market, a crowded market, your competitors won't necessarily be that honest about what they're up against. So if you're looking at marketing materials, they'll be all shiny and we're wonderful and everything's brilliant, and you have to take that with a massive pinch of salt. A market analysis is a kind of step up from the desk research, which is more specific, looking at analysis of competitors and the potential for growth. But it's obviously speculative as well, because you're never going to get people's accounts laid out in front of you. You don't always have the truth of what people are up against. And I always say with market analysis, be wary of getting fixated on competitors, because sometimes that's what happens to people. Our competitors are doing this. It's like, yes, well, where did that decision come from? Is it them sitting around in a room just speculating? I suppose the catchphrase there is make your own mistakes. So don't make the mistakes your competitor is making, make your own ones. Interviews are a great way for getting one-on-one with someone and actually exploring a topic, exploring whether a person might use a product and what their needs are. So you might interview a potential user, a potential customer. You might interview someone who works in that space. A very overlooked part of interviewing actually is just finding someone who is an expert and just asking them some questions. Because if someone's worked in an area for a long time and they don't have any particular affiliation or any particular reason to be cagey with their information, generally if you sit them down and ask them questions, they will say, oh, well, back in 2008 and then in 2020 and blah, blah, blah. And they'll tell you the story of what happened and they'll give you some insight into things. And that's very valuable, often more valuable than what's written or what's freely available out there. Obviously, the issue with interviews is that you actually have to get hold of people to interview them. You have to find the right people. It takes time. And interviewing is actually harder than it seems as well. If you do a bad interview, you can get information that's not very reliable. Surveys are always very popular. Companies that we work with often will say, can you do a survey? And we want 1,000 responses. And the thing I would say about surveys is that it will give you a very broad, high-level understanding of a group of people, but it doesn't necessarily give you what you need in terms of digging down into a topic. So it gives you quantitative stuff, how many people, what number of people, it allows you to take a particular phenomenon or a particular understanding and look at it in a bigger population. But generally, the data that you get from surveys tends to be quite limited, and surveys are very hard to write. I think people think they can write a survey, and actually it's very hard because generally they're a written thing that people have to read and understand, and the ability for people to misinterpret things never fails to amaze me. So unless your question is really, really concise and really, really clear, you will inevitably have some people who just get totally the wrong meaning, answer the question in a completely different way, and you get contaminated data because people are thinking you're asking them one thing and you're actually asking them something else. So surveys have their place, but they're not always that great for getting good, solid data. Focus groups get a bad rap. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, focus groups, oh, they're no good. And usually when I hear that, I think, well, that's probably because you don't understand how to run a focus group. So focus groups are quite different from interviews. Obviously, an interview is one-on-one with somebody. You can go in depth with them. A focus group, you get people in a room, get them to talk about something. It's a completely different setup and you're going to get a different response. But the benefit of focus groups is that you see how people discuss a topic without you being involved, especially if they're people who are really knowledgeable about a topic or have a shared understanding of something. And so you're listening to the language that you're using, you're listening to the disagreements that they're having, you're listening to how do they bring stuff up. And what will happen in a focus group is someone will say, oh, and when this happened, I thought this and that. And then someone else will say, yeah, that happened to me too. And that's a question or a piece of information you wouldn't necessarily get from an interview. So it stimulates a different sort of discussion. The downside, obviously, is focus groups give you more of a surface level understanding of each person because you can't let everybody talk for half an hour. It would be very boring. And prototype testing is, again, kind of an overlooked part of things because there is a lot of focus, especially in tech, on MVPs. So build a minimum viable product, spend loads of money and time building something that's really functional and send it out there. Why do that? Just put it on a piece of paper and test that. Do it as the lowest cost level as possible. Do it on a screen, do it on Canva, do it on Figma, do it on something that takes the least time possible to get someone to walk through screens or a process or a different kind of setup to see, does this work? Before you build anything, before you spend time and money on building something that actually might be the wrong thing. And asking the right questions is actually really hard. That's why we exist, I suppose. We come along and try to ask the right questions. But good research starts with good questions. And generally, what people want to ask is, would you use this? And the problem about asking that is lots of people will say yes, and it doesn't mean anything because that's a hypothetical situation. They don't really know what you're talking about. If you're talking about a product that doesn't currently exist and you're asking them to imagine it and say, would you use this in the future? You're asking them about an imaginary product that exists in their mind. You're not developing that imaginary product. So yes, they would use their imaginary product, but not necessarily your one. So I would say one of the big pointers is to avoid hypothetical questions. People don't live in a hypothetical world. And if you're doing research with users, you want to ask them about their actual behaviors, their actual needs, what happened like yesterday, what do they do day to day, how do they solve this particular problem, and so on. Concrete questions that they can give you specific information on, not fantasy questions about things that don't exist. And if you are interviewing users, you should always focus on what they know. So what their own lives are, what their opinions are, behaviors and needs. Avoid asking questions that are vague or difficult to answer. So we used to do some research years back with the universities, and they always wanted to ask people about their strategic priorities. And like if someone asks you, what do you think of our strategic priorities? My answer is always like, I think nothing about your strategic priorities because I don't care. So asking people about things that are really not within their knowledge or not within something that they care about, they will try to answer you because most people are quite helpful and they want to be helpful. So they'll make something up, but it's generally not that useful. You want pieces of information from people that are really solid. So say if you're investigating a product that you're developing that solves a particular solution in an office, for example, a very solid question you could ask people is, well, what do you do in this circumstance now? What do you actually, if you have this issue, what is it that you do? And chances are it's a spreadsheet, good old spreadsheets. And so if you can know how someone's solving a problem now and you reckon you can solve it better, then that's quite a solid process. You can see you solve it this way now, we can improve it in this way. That's quite an easy process. And when you're planning research, the first thing to figure out is what decisions will this research influence? Because people will often ask me, well, how much research should we do, or how much should we actually investigate a thing? Well, if a piece of research isn't directly linked to a decision, I would say don't do it. So it should be, we're doing this because we want to find out this and then do that. And it's not like academic research. It's not like you're ranging around trying to get statistical significance and loads of data and whatever. We want to know enough that we can confidently, as much as we can, make this decision and move forward. And sometimes that decision will be, should we make this thing at all? Is it worth our time? Sometimes it is, what is the current situation in this environment where we're trying to develop this product? But you should have a decision ready to go from the research that you're carrying out, and you should be that influences how you design the research. The first step then after that is figuring out what do we already know, because generally you'll have some knowledge, or your team will have some knowledge, and putting that all together and understanding what you already know is quite important, because you might have enough knowledge in one part of your research. You don't actually have to investigate that. You just need to ask another question or an additional question on top of that. But the caveat is to say, what do we already know, and then how do we know this? Is there actual evidence, or are we just guessing? So the question I will often ask companies is, they will say, we know our customers are men who are between 18 and 24, and they like this, that, and the other. And I'll say, right, how do you know that? And they're like, well, we just made it up. It's like, well, that's great. It's a good start in terms of guessing and understanding where you might be looking. But without any evidence, it is just a guess. And so building or spending money based on a guess is quite risky. So don't do that. Obviously, with research, you want to know, what questions do we want to answer? So what are the things we need to know from this piece of research? What are the things that allow us to move forward and make a decision? What constraints do we have? Time, budget, access to participants, and this final one can be a barrier depending on who it is you're wanting to research with. Obviously, if you're researching with a very niche group, having access to them could be quite difficult. And what methods could we use? So do you want to do interviews? What focus group? Do you want to do a focus group? Do you want to do a survey? Whatever it could be. And I suppose what I would say to anyone who's designing anything, creating anything, is that an effective design process should involve rejecting a lot of ideas. That's basically the process. Is no, that won't work, no, that won't work, no, that won't work, no, that won't work, no, that won't work. And when we first start working with a company, it tends to be kind of frustrating for them because they just think, are we ever going to get to something that does work? And the thing is, yes, you do, but it's digging through the bad ideas to get to the good idea. It just takes a bit of time and it takes a bit of patience. And the tendency is for people to go, oh, that'll do, that'll work. And the problem is, if you start with a wobbly idea, going back to the fantastic graph that I had at the start, the fantastic image I had at the start. If you start with a wobbly idea, it's going to be wobbly all the way. You're far better off trying to solidify that idea as much as you can, but getting rid of all the bad ideas before you go forward with it. And, within reason. Obviously, you're not going to spend 2 years investigating everything. At some point, you have to say, yes, we've made a decision now, we're going to take a step forward. The problem is sometimes you take a step forward and then you realize something and you have to take a step back. It's patience. You have to be patient. And research does help you to sift and reject quickly. So if you're not doing research, generally you will be moving forward with an idea too quickly, probably the wrong idea. And the idea with research is once you do a bit of research, usually you go, no, it's very obvious, that's just not going to work. Get rid of it. We thought that was going to be a great idea. We've found out now it's not going to be. Reject it. And that clears the way a lot more quickly than if you're not doing research, because there's a tendency to just go ahead with an idea regardless of the signals that are coming in that say, actually, no, this isn't going to work. And then once you do identify an idea with potential, the next step is to gather more evidence and then to iterate and improve it, grow it, build it, and slowly work your way up to, okay, this is the thing, this is what we're delivering. And you need to track the impact of each significant decision so that you know what's working and what isn't. And this is something that, going back to MVPs, that's my big gripe with MVPs. Because an MVP generally, what tends to happen is people will build something that's functional. Either nowadays you might use Lovable or one of those things to build something that actually works and has buttons and does things. The problem is, once you build something functional, you've made 100, 150, 200, maybe more decisions. And they're all in a mush in this MVP. And if you go and test it and you find, oh, it's not really working, well, which one of your decisions was wrong? Was it the idea? Was it the look of it? Was it the buttons? Was it the structure? There's too many decisions there. So you want to be able to track the decisions that you're making and understand whether this one was the right decision or not. Now, obviously, again, within reason, sometimes there's a bunch of decisions that happen within a decision-making process, but if you make too many decisions at once, it's very difficult to understand which one was the wrong one. So keep it simple, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say there. And if you're not sure about something, test it as simply as possible. Draw it on a piece of paper and put it in front of somebody. Go, does this make sense? What are you doing here? What does this do? And if the person's like, I don't get this, or where's the login screen, or whatever, then at least you have some feedback to go, oh yeah, okay, I need to think again. I need to think about the structure of it. Test it, put it in front of someone, show it to the light of day, because at least that gives you an idea of what's going on. And then deciding to abandon or pivot, which most startups will have to do at some point. Pivot, hopefully not abandon. And the red flags to watch out for in terms of an idea are, the first one I'd say is the idea is complex and difficult to explain. It should be pretty simple. It should be easy enough to explain what you're doing. It shouldn't take 17 minutes to explain what a thing does and lots of qualifications. And because generally, if it's a new product or something you've not developed already, then why is it so complicated is my first thought. Why are you trying to develop this really complicated thing when it doesn't exist? There's too many variables, there's too many complex things going on. It's difficult to find a clear need or desire for the solution. So you've looked around and you've tried to find it, and really it's very difficult to pinpoint who exactly might want this. It's sort of hitting, but not quite. The potential customer base is very niche or very small. Now that's not a completely given red flag. A very niche customer base can be good for a very high value product. So if you're developing something for air traffic controllers and they really, really need it, then yeah, you're on the money. But if you're developing something for just helping people who liked bow ties for their dogs, might be too small a cohort for it to really work. The cost or resources required are too high compared to the price customers are willing to pay. So it will cost a very large amount of money to develop this thing. It's very complex and people don't care that much about it. They want to pay a very small amount or nothing at all. The potential impact and risk can't be justified or mitigated. So I think that's AI. It's like costs huge amounts to generate, lots of random responses. It's very expensive in terms of the environment, and can that be justified? Well, that's a moral question that you can grapple with in your own time. And there isn't a clear business model. That's an issue that a lot of companies are up against, is how are you going to make money? And I could talk endlessly about business models, but I won't go into it too much. But you need to have a clear way of explaining. If you're explaining to an investor, how are they going to get their money back? Well, if you can't really explain it, then that's an issue. And this is the thing. I would say we talk to a lot of startups and scale-ups and established companies, actually. And generally, when people are innovating or starting a new idea, almost 100% of the time it's too complicated. It's too complicated. Simplify it down, start simple, and then you can build in complexity over time. Because if you start with a complex idea, it's very difficult to deliver it. You get confused very easily. It's a lot of energy drain. Try and start something simple first, and then build something onto that over time. It's easier, and it's more likely to work. Consider smaller, boring problems. People like big things. They like big impact. There's a lot of small problems out there that need to be solved, or boring problems that's not very interesting to solve. But if you fix one part of a process or adding some simple feature, it can make a huge difference. So that's obviously Stripe, for example, did one part of the payment process. They're Irish, so I can claim them as my own. And they bought a castle in the middle of Ireland, just because why not? But they solved a very kind of technical part of the payment process, which is really not shiny or interesting, but it worked, and then everyone wanted it. Beware of assumptions. Make sure your decisions are based on real evidence. Beware of thinking, I do know this. I know that this is true. Do you really, or have you made it up? And iterate, and iterate again. So the iterative process, if anyone's familiar with it, is you start with something, you go back over it, change it, you move it forward, you go back over it, you change it, you move it forward, you go back over it, you go back over it, you go back, start again. And it's a slow process, but it works. And you get feedback as you go along to develop that process and figure out what will actually work. Oh, yes, I have the right date there. So if you want to come along to our meetup, it's on the 18th of September at 6:30, University of Nottingham Innovation Park, Ingenuity Centre. It's a free meetup, there's pizza. Do come along if you feel like it. And as I say, there'll be a workshop there, so it'll be kind of interesting, a bit unusual, a bit different. Questions? Why is that so tiny? Small questions. Just small questions, please. It's very tiny. I didn't mean that to be that tiny. Anyway.
So you talked about rejecting ideas. Have you got examples where some of those rejected ideas then do come back into the mix?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What triggered those ideas to come back?
It's a very difficult process to kind of figure out. There's so many moving parts, I think, when you're trying to develop something, especially if it's a new idea, because there's the idea itself, it's the what is this product, and then it's who you're developing it for, and what's the business model, and what's the market. And sometimes you sort of start to nail down one part of it, and then that sort of slips through your fingers a little bit, and you're like, no, actually, we're going to go into this different customer base because this looks more promising, and that starts to develop. And then you come back around when you understand that customer base. Suddenly, your idea now starts to make sense for them, if that makes sense. So it's trying to link all of those together. And you could have a business model when your original idea, when you put them together, they didn't really work. But actually now that you've gone into this new customer base and you've modified the idea, now the business model works. But it's a lot of kind of back and forth and figuring it out. And at the end, you're trying to figure out what's the value and who will pay for it. What actual value are you delivering and who will pay for that value? And sometimes people develop that value for one area and then they realize they're not that interested in that. They don't really care about it that much. But actually, if you take that value and put it into a completely different customer base, to a different world, suddenly they're ravenous for it. Like, this is really important for them. And so the environment, the ecosystem, all of that makes a difference as to what is valuable and what is not in different places. I wish I had a really good example for that, but I don't. I'm trying to think now because I do have an example, I suppose, where a company we worked with a while back, they were trying to develop something for in restaurant, in cafes, the screens that they have, in Costa and stuff, where they do advertising for different products. And that world is quite a weird world. There's lots of layers to it, and there's people who do advertising, there's people who buy the screens, there's people who manage the screens. And so when we did the interviews and research on it, their model just didn't work for it because they had targeted the wrong customer. But then when they started doing that research, we realized actually there is a completely different kind of benefit that you can give them around the data aspect of what you're doing. They had like a data management sort of part of their tool, which people were interested in. They were like, actually, that would be really useful. We don't care about the advertising, but that's all taken care of by this machine of like, they send us pictures and whatever. But the data, that's really useful. And so one part of their whole kind of product was actually what people wanted, and so they just went with that in that world, and they just hadn't had any awareness that even existed, until they actually talked to people and were, yeah, we'll have that, thanks. So it's a difficult one. It can be feel a bit like feeling in the dark until you go, oh, okay, this is it.
Archiving the data, the assumptions and the data, and then reviewing that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a process, so over time you should be you shouldn't be forgetting it, I suppose, hopefully, but I suppose you are planning for a process where maybe, you get to a point you get lost in the weeds a little bit and you've forgotten what you were actually trying to do in the first place. But hopefully it should be, that iterative process does kind of retain a lot of that information, because you should know where all those decisions came from. Like I was saying, with that kind of keep it simple and start to build the decisions, you should be able to trace back and go, well, why did we make that decision? Why did we abandon that at that point? Has something changed now that means that actually now this is coming back in again? And it does help with that, I think, that iterative process, because you're not mushing loads of decisions together where you're like, well, why do we do that? And it is often the case. I'll work with companies and they'll say, why did you do that? And they can't tell me. I'm like, oh, that's a bit worrying, isn't it? Because you've just made a decision that has a bit of an effect on everything, but you can't really tell me why. That happens at every organization, big and small, so it's not an uncommon problem.
And do you have any advice for how to find users, like potential users to speak to when you don't have customers, like in your interviews or other users?
Social media, it depends on who you're looking for, really. I mean, we use recruitment companies depending on the situation that we're working in. So they will actually go and recruit people specifically. So you can specify to them, we want people aged 18 to 25 who live in this area, blah, blah, blah. And they have databases of people that they draw on, or they have advertising that they do. But if you don't have the budget for that, then you do need to identify who it is you want to talk to and then figure out how to get hold of them, basically. So Facebook, does anyone use Facebook anymore? But Facebook groups are actually quite useful for that. Or social media, in various ways. The downside of that is that you can get quite a lot of randomness in that, especially if you just put out a call to people. You might get people, we've had people say, yes, I'm in my 50s, and they get on the screen and it's like, you're definitely not in your 50s. Or you're a very young looking in your 50s, which is the downside of offering incentives, because we would offer incentives as well. So it would be 20 or 30 pounds per hour to interview a person. But then sometimes people just want the money and they're not actually suitable. So, but even just finding people in your social circle who might be the right sort of people might be a good start.
Just to kind of touch on that, a good option might be Reddit.
Yeah, although Reddit is you have to be careful.
You do have to be careful.
They're very hot on trying to stop people from using their platform.
It is pretty random, but the good thing about it is like you don't need to put out a question, because you do have hubs of people talking about certain ideas, so you could just notice, and then if you do need that data, you could try and specify, but you also need to be cautious of the data. But that would be very helpful.
Oh yeah, so actually looking at Reddit discussions about particular things.
So
yeah, it is an interesting start, definitely, with the caveat that people behave quite differently on social media than they do in real life.
I was going to point out, like with the working in marketing, one of the things I've noticed very simply is when people get to the marketing stage, they have done some research, and the problem is the research that they have when it eventually meets the market might be very different reaction, and a lot of people aren't willing to change the format. I know the amount of conversations I have with clients where it's not working. It's like because the market isn't receptive to what you're saying. So I mostly tend to recommend that if you do want to do marketing, if you have a budget of say 2K to push everything, it's always good to take a tiny portion, even if it's £50, and just try like a tiny A/B test to see if this would actually work with a different audience. So that way, if it works, then but it always gives you data to expand more if the time comes. So if you think your audience is like the bow ties for dogs thing, if you thought your audience was women of a certain age, you go to a certain location, and then you decide to try something for maybe boys who are between 16 to 24, you might still see that still is a very relevant audience. So I'd always recommend like trying like a tiny A/B test to see if that data that you have and the research you have is actually viable, and if there are other markets that might help it.
Yeah, and experimentation is always worth doing, isn't it? Like where you just try something, and see what happens. Try it on a small scale. Don't spend thousands on it. Just give it a try. See what happens. Change something. Change a variable. Change your approach. Change what you say, and see if that has any impact. Yeah, so I definitely agree with that. And